I'm no hero. And maybe I never really was a good man to begin with. My name is Raymond Ellis. Born in 1948, small town Kentucky. I'm telling this story not because I expect forgiveness, but because I don't want to take it to the grave like some half-buried lie. I enlisted in 1967. I was 19. Nobody forced me, I signed up on my own. Part of it was my father who had served in Korea. The rest? I guess I believed in America. Believed in our cause. Believed that what we were doing was righteous. That the Vietnamese people needed our help. I was naive. But back then, weren't we all? I still remember the day I left home. My mother handed me a tiny cloth pouch with a cross sewn on it. She didn't say much, just cried. My father gave me a firm handshake, a slap on the back. He was never one for words, but I knew he was proud. And my little sister, she stood by the screen door, biting her lip like she wanted to say something but couldn't. I never looked back. Getting on that army bus felt like stepping into a movie. Blonde-haired, clean-shaven kid with big dreams and a duffel bag full of pride. They put us through basic training for a few weeks, then loaded us onto AC-130. No ceremony. No speeches. Just gear, guns, and the buzz of adrenaline. That plane smelled like sweat and steel. It carried boys who still thought they were invincible. I got a seat near the window. Watched my country fade away under a blanket of clouds. Some guys slept. Some read letters. I just stared into the sky, trying to picture what was coming. Vietnam in my head was just pictures from newspapers. Rice paddies, conical hats, waving red flags. A strange, poor land that needed saving. Part of me was excited. Another part terrified. But mostly I was curious. When we landed in Da Nang, the first thing that hit me was the heat. Not summer heat like Kentucky. This was heavier, thicker. Like the air itself was soaked in sweat and smoke. There were choppers overhead. Trucks rumbling. Orders being barked. And the smell, gunpowder, burnt oil, mold, and something else. Something human. It hit you deep, like it didn't just touch your skin but crawled into your lungs and stayed there. They herded us onto military trucks. No welcome committee. No briefing. Just blank stares from older soldiers who looked like they'd left their souls somewhere in the jungle. On the ride to base, I saw my first real Vietnamese civilians. They stood by the road watching us pass. They didn't wave. Didn't smile. Just watched. Some frowned. Some turned away. I didn't get it back then. But later I'd understand. They didn't see us as liberators. They saw us as ghosts, riding in armored trucks, bringing something too dark to name. That first night at the camp, I couldn't sleep. Somewhere off in the distance, I heard gunfire. A rat scurried across the floor. Wind pushed through the cracks in the wooden walls. I lay there staring at the ceiling, wondering, what will I do the first time I see someone die? I had never seen death up close. Back home, death wore makeup in a casket and came with flowers. But this would be raw. Screaming. Blood. I didn't know if I was ready for that. I didn't even know if I had enough humanity left in me to survive it. Back home, people called me a hero. The neighbors shook my hand, told me I'd make them proud. I believed them. I really did. I thought I was going to be a hero. But what I didn't know was, some wounds don't come with medals. I slept in fragments that first night at camp. Cold sweat soaked my back even though the air had cooled. That might have been the last time I carried anything resembling hope. The next morning we were sent out. No time to adjust to the battlefield, like I had imagined. They threw us into the jungle like dry wood into fire, and the only thing expected of us was to burn. The jungle buzzed constantly, like a twisted orchestra of insects and humidity. Leaves the size of my hand blocked the sky. Every step we took squished into soft mud or snapped on something that didn't feel like a branch. I remember clearly the first time I heard real gunfire up close. Not from training tapes. Not from firing ranges. A sharp crack that split the air, followed by a scream. One of our men had stepped on a trap. His leg was gone. Nobody screamed. Nobody panicked. Everyone just moved, like machines. I froze, clutching my rifle so tight my knuckles went numb. My heart slammed into my ribs so hard I thought it would burst. That was when I learned, war doesn't start with a warning. It begins with blood, suddenly and unforgivingly real. Our orders were search and destroy, a phrase I later understood meant shoot anything that looks wrong. No questions. No time. It didn't matter if they had a weapon or a sack of rice. The enemy wore no uniform. They could be anyone, a man with a shovel, an old woman chewing betel nut, a child hanging onto their mother's skirt. And that uncertainty made us pull the trigger more often, and think less. The first time I saw a squad mate shoot into a house because it looked off, it turned out there were only 2 elderly people inside cooking rice. They survived. But I can't forget the man's eyes as he looked at me. It wasn't fear. It was disgust. He didn't speak English, but somehow I heard the words, "Who do you think you are, bringing death and calling it freedom?" I had no answer. I just held my breath and looked away, pretending I didn't understand. The sweeps became more frequent. Maps told us where to go, but never what was right. We burned rice, shot buffalo, tore apart sleeping mats looking for hidden tunnels. Most of the time we found nothing, just the blank stares of villagers who had lost too much to even react. I once imagined I'd meet the Vietnamese and explain why we were there, to help, to protect. But standing in front of them, people who couldn't speak my language and didn't need to, I had nothing left to say. One day I saw an old woman, maybe 70, cradling her dead grandson. He couldn't have been older than 10. We didn't shoot him. Maybe he died from shrapnel. Maybe malaria. Nobody knew. I reached out to help, foolishly thinking I could do something. She looked at me, spat on the ground, and turned away. I stood there, hands still in the air, like a ghost no one asked for. That night I didn't eat. I wrote in my journal, maybe we didn't come here to save anyone. Maybe we came here to learn how to survive without believing in anything. And still we moved. Still we burned. Still we shot. We lived in a fog I couldn't name, not anger, not fear. Just numbness. I once asked an older sergeant, "How do you tell who's the enemy?" He just smirked, spit out his chew and said, "If they run when you shout, shoot. If they don't run, shout louder." That answer has followed me my whole life. We started to lose all feeling. Death didn't shock us anymore. Explosions just made our ears ring. A burning village was just another name crossed off a map. It wasn't war anymore. It was callous repetition. I used to think I was a liberator, but I was just an invader who could recite the national anthem. I remember one morning, sunlight filtering through the leaves, a child ran past our position. No threat. No weapon. Just running. Maybe to find his mother. Maybe away from a snake. One guy raised his rifle. I shouted, "Don't!" But the shot had already fired. The boy dropped, face in the dirt. The soldier just shrugged. "Can't be sure," he muttered. "Better safe than sorry." I knelt beside the boy's body. And in that moment, I didn't feel like a soldier. I felt like a thief. A terrorist. A predator dressed in camouflage. Back at base, I sat in silence, curled in on myself. A friend asked, "You okay?" I shook my head. No, I wasn't. I was dying. Not from bombs or bullets, but because I no longer knew who I was. I don't remember the exact day. Just that the night was dark, and the wind felt strangely cold. After days lost in the jungle, time blurred like muddy water. We had just returned from a 3-day patrol when we were ordered out again, for a night operation near a rural village outside Quang Tri. We moved in silence, boots sinking into dry rice fields, weaving past creaking bamboo. Every step felt like it might trigger a mine. I didn't trust anything anymore, except the rifle in my hands. The village was small, maybe 4 or 5 huts. Most of the people had already left, or fled. What remained were half-collapsed walls and the smell of old smoke. And then we found them. 3 women, dragged from a hut by the others in my squad. Their hands were tied with dirty rope, backs bent under the weight of fear. One was older, one middle-aged, and one could not have been more than 20. I stood there, my breathing shallow and sharp. I had never seen eyes like hers, no tears, no trembling, no begging. Just a look, steady, resigned. Like she had seen this before. Like she knew screaming wouldn't change anything. One of the guys, who had killed a kid the week before, grinned like he had just walked into a bar. I yelled, "Stop. What the hell are you doing?" They paused, then laughed louder. "Ray," one of them said, looking at me like I was some naive rookie, "we could be dead tomorrow. Enjoy it while you can." I stepped forward and shoved him away from her. He threw me to the ground so hard my breath left my chest. And what happened after that? I've wished every day since that I hadn't heard, that I hadn't seen, that I hadn't survived long enough to remember it. I got up, but my legs wouldn't move. I wanted to stop them, but there were 4 of them all armed. I wasn't strong enough, and I chose to do nothing. I turned around. I covered my ears, but there were no screams, no cries, only the rustle of leaves and a gaze that cut through my back like a blade. She was still looking, not pleading, not blaming, just looking, as if to ask me something I'd never be brave enough to answer. I didn't pull the trigger, but I killed my soul the moment I turned away. From that night on, I stopped talking to anyone in my unit. I ate alone, slept alone. Every time I looked at them, I saw blood on my own hands. I started dry heaving in the mornings. Couldn't sleep. I tried to write it down but tore the pages apart. I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the man staring back. A week later I saw the medic. They said I had combat stress, prescribed pills. But there's no pill for what I carried after that night. One day while cleaning my rifle, one of the men walked in. "I know what you're thinking," he said. "But those bitches aren't people. They're Viet Cong. They'd kill us if they had the chance. Don't lose sleep over it." I didn't answer. I just smiled. But deep inside, I knew, if I had anything human left in me, I couldn't stay with them another day. I didn't pull the trigger. But I killed my soul the moment I turned away. I asked to be transferred. They denied it, said I was still fit for combat. But I knew I was already dead. Not from a bullet, but because everything I believed in had been strangled that night. I once thought about writing to my mother, telling her what I saw. But how do you write? "Mom," I stood there and watched it happen. And I did nothing. There were no words clean enough for that truth. After the war, people would ask me, "Did you ever kill anyone?" I always said, "No." But the truth is, I watched something greater than a life be destroyed. I witnessed the death of what was right, what was moral, what was human, and I stayed silent. And in war, sometimes silence is the loudest shot fired. About 3 weeks after that night, he died. Not from enemy fire, but from a mine laid by our own unit. No one had marked the map. I recognized the body from a distance, his lower half torn apart. His face was still intact, eyes wide open, like he hadn't figured out what had happened. I stood there, silent. No tears, no rage, just relief. Like a shadow inside me had lifted, even for a second. And immediately shame followed. I shouldn't have felt that. He was a fellow soldier. An American. One of ours. But my heart whispered something different. Maybe one piece of evil just disappeared from the world today. After his quick, impersonal burial, a shallow pit, a flag draped over like a ritual more than honor, I sat alone, searching for something, anything to feel clearly. But there was nothing. Just a hollow space. I started talking to a few others in the unit, guys I'd usually avoided. I didn't tell them what happened that night. But I asked, "Do you ever feel like something's wrong? Deep down?" A young soldier, usually the joking type, gave a faint smile and said, "Every night." Another just shrugged. But in his eyes, I saw the exhaustion of someone who had been screaming inside for so long, no one could hear anymore. We were all wounded. Just not bleeding. Each of us carried our own secret scars, hidden in the back of our minds like shameful tattoos. One night, I woke to the sound of gunfire. The whole camp panicked. People yelling, crawling for cover. But there was no enemy. Just one of our guys, barely 20, firing into the darkness. No one knew why. He kept crying, whispering, "I saw someone. I swear there was someone." They took him away. He never came back. After that, I started sleepwalking. Guys told me I'd get up at night, grab my rifle, mutter things they couldn't understand. When they shook me awake, I remembered nothing. I started drinking more. At first, just a few sips, to sleep. Then full canteens, to stop dreaming. Drugs were easy. Morphine, sedatives, whatever someone could steal or trade for cigarettes. We didn't use them to feel good. We used them to feel nothing. One day I looked around the base and realized there were no living men here. Only walking shells, able to shoot, march, laugh, but no longer capable of being alive. War doesn't need you to die. It just needs you to stop living. I used to think death was the cruelest part of war. But now I knew there was something worse. Surviving and not being yourself anymore. Waking up each day knowing you're still breathing, but feeling nothing. Not hunger, not sorrow, not joy. Just a void, growing deeper with every sunrise. I once asked an officer, "Do you ever wonder if we're all going insane and just can't tell anymore?" He didn't laugh. He just looked at me and said, "You think I haven't asked myself that too?" I used to think that surviving and leaving Vietnam would mean everything would go back to normal. I was wrong. The flight back to America landed on a gray, overcast day. There were no flags waving. No marching bands. No one waiting behind security fences. We stepped off the plane like shadows. No one looked us in the eyes. Some people turned away. Others whispered. An older woman saw the patch on my uniform. She pulled her grandson across the street like I was some kind of wild animal about to attack. I had never felt so foreign in my own country. Everyone around me had moved on. They had jobs, families, routines, Saturday grocery runs, Sunday football games. Their world never paused. Only I was stuck, still trapped in Vietnam in my mind, while America no longer had a place for me to return to. I lived with my parents those first few months. My mother said I had changed. I was quiet, jumpy, always staring off at nothing. My father never asked anything, but I could see in his eyes a mix of pity and fear. I tried to get a job. People asked if I had a criminal record. I said, I was in Vietnam. No one said anything, but no one called back either. One day I ran into Rick, another soldier from my unit. He was one of the men who raped the girl that night. He was sitting in a dim little bar, thinner than I remembered, hair prematurely gray, eyes distant. I wanted to walk away, but he called out to me. "Ray," he said, voice raspy like he'd just woken from a long nightmare, "do you ever feel guilty?" I didn't answer right away, just looked at him. "That night," he continued, "I know you saw. I know you weren't like the rest of us." Still I said nothing. "You ever wonder," he asked, eyes wet and trembling, "if out there on the other side of the world I've got a kid? Some mixed-race child? I don't know. I don't even want to know." He laughed, a bitter, broken laugh like someone who had nothing left to lose. I didn't say a word. I just stood up and walked out. That night, I stood in front of the mirror, staring into my own eyes, searching for an answer. I don't know if I have a child out there, but I know without a doubt I left my humanity behind. I began writing, not to tell a story but to stop myself from falling apart. I wrote about the memories, the sleepless nights, the nameless faces I passed like a poisonous breeze. Some mornings I'd wake with a weight on my chest, like someone had placed a stone over my lungs. I couldn't breathe, couldn't scream, just froze in place. I avoided crowds. I skipped church. Never went to veteran reunions. I couldn't pretend. One day my mother handed me a photo. Me at 18 in full uniform, arm raised, proud smile on my face. She said, That's the son I remember. I nodded. But I knew, the boy in that picture was long dead. Somewhere between the jungles near Quang Tri, buried beneath a stare that never cried, never begged, just looked straight into my soul and never blinked. I tried therapy. The doctor said it was PTSD. But he didn't get it. This pain wasn't about being afraid of dying. It was about living and doing things I could never forgive myself for. I didn't need pills to forget. I needed a reason to remember and not shatter. One day I got a letter from an old squad mate. He said he was living in California, had a family, but still dreamed of gunfire and the smell of burning hair. I read that letter over and over thinking, we never left Vietnam. We just changed the coordinates of our nightmares. When someone asks me, do you miss Vietnam? I answer, I never left. Ever since I came back, I kept breathing, but I wasn't really alive. The years after the war felt like time had stopped. I couldn't hold down a job for more than a few months. Not because I lacked the skills, but because I didn't belong. People would joke during lunch breaks about football, movies, family. I sat there, forcing a smile. But all I could hear were footsteps in the jungle, shallow breaths before pulling a trigger. I once tried dating a woman who worked at a little bookstore near home. She was gentle, kind. She brewed coffee for me every Saturday evening. But every time she touched my hand, I flinched. Every time she looked at me a moment too long, I felt exposed. I left without a word. No note. No explanation. She never called. I stayed away from crowds, not because I feared people, but because I feared I'd scream. Scream her name. Scream the truth I'd buried so deep in my chest for so many years. I started keeping a journal, not for anyone to read, not to publish, just to survive. Some days I'd write 5 pages. Some days only 1 sentence. Today I still haven't forgiven myself. Once, during a routine checkup at the VA center, a nurse asked, have you ever tried a support group? I shook my head. She handed me a piece of paper with the address of a community hall in the suburbs. I kept that paper for 3 weeks. Every time I looked at it, my hands trembled. Then one rainy afternoon, for reasons I still don't fully understand, I went. The room was small. Folding chairs in a circle. 10 people, all ages. Some wore badges. Some wore plain clothes. But in their eyes, I saw the same shadow I carried. The facilitator asked, who wants to share today? No hands went up. No one spoke. And then I heard my voice say, I do. I told my story. Not everything, but enough. About that night. About the girl's eyes, dry, silent, piercing. About the silence that murdered my soul more thoroughly than any bullet. I don't know how long I talked, but when I stopped, no one laughed. No one judged. Just silence. And then, a man next to me, maybe 60, gray hair, scarred hands, spoke softly. I stood there too, and I didn't stop it either. I turned to him. He didn't lower his gaze. Didn't flinch. Our eyes met. And there was nothing left to say. I wasn't alone. And for the first time, I allowed myself to cry. For years I'd lived like a ghost, hiding from light, afraid to be seen. But in that moment I knew I wasn't the only ghost walking. Everyone in that room carried wounds without shape, without blood. But they bled silently inside, every single day. I kept going to group every week. Not to talk. To listen. To learn how to forgive. Not what I did, but the fact that I still existed. I still kept a journal. But now I wrote little things too. Today I drank coffee on the porch. The wind was nice. No one screamed in my head. I dreamed of my mother, and for once there was no fire. I don't know if I'll ever be free from the war. But now I know there are others walking beside me, quietly, patiently, and they understand me better than anyone else ever could. I began allowing myself to smile. Just a little. I still wake up startled in the night. But instead of holding my breath, I let it go. And each time I whisper to myself, I'm still here. And maybe, one day I'll know what it means to truly live again. I don't know why I survived. Some say God gave me extra time to make amends. But this kind of guilt, can it ever be redeemed? I've spent most of my life in silence, quietly breathing, quietly remembering, quietly afraid. And now as I write these words, I know I don't have much time left. I don't write for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I write this as a final letter in place of an apology sent to a past I can never rewrite. To the women who were destroyed in that war. Maybe you're no longer alive to hear this. Maybe you never had the chance to tell your story. But I still need to say this. I saw you. I was there. And I did nothing. I wasn't the one holding the gun, but I was silent. And in war, silence can be just as cruel. I remember your eyes. No anger, no pleading, just watching. I have carried that gaze in my heart for over 50 years. If I could go back, I'd do everything differently. But time doesn't run in reverse. To the children left behind, those with no idea who their fathers were, the ones with half Asian, half American faces, who grew up asking a question with no answer. Where did I come from? Maybe among you is someone who is Rick's child, or the child of one of the others, or a child of someone like me, who turned away. I don't know. And maybe you never will either. But I want you to know, this is not your burden. You do not carry our shame. You deserve a childhood untouched by ghosts. A future free from wars you didn't start. If you're reading this, know that somewhere there's an old American soldier who thinks of you, with all the regret a human heart can hold. And finally, to the young soldiers of today. Those who never stepped into Vietnam's jungles, but who now carry rifles, packs, and belief in a cause. I'm not here to tell you not to fight. Sometimes there is no other option. But if ever you find yourself standing between life and death, right and wrong, instinct and conscience, please hold on to your humanity. Because after the war ends and the guns go quiet, it will be the only thing that can save you from yourself. No one can predict what will happen. In the fog of battle, lines blur. But if you can, don't look away. Because the things you don't stop will haunt you forever. I'm sitting here writing these words in a small room, alone. On the wall is an old map of Vietnam, faded, torn at the edges. I keep it not for pride, but because it's the place where a part of my soul still lives. Someone once asked me, "You came back. You survived. Do you feel lucky?" I didn't know how to answer. All I could say was, I survived the war. But I'm not sure if I ever truly came back as a man. If you're still listening, thank you for hearing what no one else ever wanted to say. If you've lived through war, or carry a wound that doesn't bleed, tell your story. Not because the world needs to hear it, but maybe you need to hear it yourself.